The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon as the trucks rumbled up the cracked asphalt driveway, their tires crunching over scattered gravel and fallen leaves. Elliot Graves sat behind the wheel of the lead vehicle, his jaw tight with a mixture of fatigue and resolve. Holleridge loomed, a head-on, imposing, forgotten relic of a bygone era, its brick facade scarred by time and neglect. The once proud boarding school stood silent, its windows shattered or clouded with grime, like vacant eyes staring into the gathering dusk. Elliot pushed open the truck door and stepped out, leather jacket creaking softly as he moved. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood, earth, and something faintly metallic that he couldn't place. He glanced back at his crew, a group of men and women of varying ages and experience, each carrying tools and equipment necessary for the renovation project. This was the first day of what was meant to be a transformative venture, turning Holleridge into luxury condominiums. But already the building seemed to resist, whispering its own story. "All right, team," Elliot called out, trying to inject warmth into his voice. "Let's get our bearings. Claire, you're with me for the initial walkthrough. Jared, Tommy, start unloading the equipment. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual." Claire Dunham, the project's architect, gave a tight nod, but her expression betrayed skepticism. She had heard the rumors about Holleridge, about its dark history and the stories whispered by locals, but she was a pragmatist. Ghost stories had no place in blueprints and construction schedules. The crew fanned out as Elliot and Claire pushed open the heavy front doors. They groaned on their hinges, releasing a stale breath of air that smelled of age and abandonment. Inside, the grand foyer stretched out before them, its high ceilings now stained and cracked, ornate moldings chipped and crumbling. Sunlight filtered weakly through dusty panes, casting mottled patterns on the threadbare carpet. "Looks like no one's set foot in here for decades," Claire muttered, running her fingers along the banister, disturbed by the thin layer of dust. Elliot nodded. "We'll have to be careful. These old buildings have a way of surprising you." As they moved deeper into the school, the silence pressed in. Footsteps echoed against warped wooden floors. Every creak and groan of the aging structure seemed amplified. In one corridor, Elliot noticed a panel in the wall that didn't quite match the surrounding plaster. It was loose, and when he pried it open, a narrow crawlspace revealed itself, wrapped in shadows. "What do you think's back there?" Tommy asked, his voice low and filled with a mixture of excitement and unease. "Probably just some old service tunnels or storage," Elliot replied, though his eyes lingered longer than necessary. "But we'll check it out later." As the crew explored the building, small peculiarities began to surface. Whispered voices seemed to drift faintly through the air, too soft to catch clearly but persistent enough to unsettle. A cold draft moved through closed rooms, carrying with it the faintest scent of forgotten things, faded paper, old wood, and something else, something that felt like sorrow. Elliot pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and began to write. He detailed the layout, noted the condition of the building, and recorded the odd noises and sensations that seemed to cling to the walls. The journal was his way of imposing order on the creeping unease that threatened to overwhelm him. As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the broken windows, the crew gathered in the main hall. Faces were drawn tight, eyes darting to corners where shadows pooled unnaturally. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken fears. Claire broke the silence. "We should finish up for today and regroup tomorrow. This place, it's more than just old walls." Elliot nodded silently, feeling the weight of her words. "Tomorrow, we start uncovering the truth." Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass, and somewhere deep within the walls, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to answer back. The journey into Holleridge had begun, and with it, the stirring of something that had waited far too long to be forgotten. The morning sun cast long, muted shadows over the crumbling facade of the Holleridge boarding school, its once proud stone walls now bleached and cracked by decades of neglect. Elliot Graves parked the cruise van just beyond the rusting iron gates, the tires crunching on gravel scattered with brittle leaves. He stepped out, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Around him, his team gathered, their faces etched with a mix of anticipation and fatigue. Today was the day they would begin dismantling the old walls, tearing down the remnants of a place long forgotten, yet not quite dead. "All right, folks," Elliot called out, his voice steady but low. "Let's keep it sharp and safe. This building's been sitting empty for years, and who knows what we'll find behind these walls." The crew nodded, some exchanging uneasy glances. Jared Morales, the lead construction worker, hefted a sledgehammer, his muscular frame taut with readiness. Tommy Briggs, the young apprentice, lingered near Elliot, eyes wide and alert, as if expecting the walls themselves to whisper warnings. The demolition began in earnest. Dust billowed as the first swings of the sledgehammer broke through plaster and wood. The sound echoed down the hollow corridors, a violent intrusion into the silence that had reigned for decades. Then, with a sudden, hollow crack, the wall gave way to reveal a narrow opening, a doorway previously concealed beneath layers of brick and mortar. Elliot's heart thudded as he stepped closer, peering into the dim space beyond. The air inside smelled of stale dust and forgotten memories. Faded drawings clung to the walls, and scattered across the floor lay relics of a childhood lost, cracked dolls, worn leather shoes, a ragged teddy bear missing an eye, and a small wooden train set frozen in place. "Jesus," Jared muttered, stepping inside cautiously. "How does a room like this just disappear?" Tommy edged closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like they never wanted anyone to find it." The room seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the silence weighted with untold stories. Elliot pulled out his leather-bound journal, already heavy with notes from the first day, and began to write. "I don't like this," Claire Dunham said from behind, her tone skeptical. Hidden rooms in an abandoned building always mean more trouble than they're worth. Before Elliot could respond, a soft voice seemed to flutter through the air, a child's laughter, distant and fleeting. He glanced sharply at the others, but no one else appeared to have heard it. He shook his head, pushing the unease aside. "We document, we proceed carefully, and we stay together." Just then, Maya Chen arrived, her practical clothing dusted with the grime of the site. She carried a worn leather satchel filled with notebooks and old photographs. "I heard you found something," she said, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of fascination and sorrow. Maya knelt beside a faded diary lying open on a splintered desk. "This belonged to one of the students," she explained softly. "She wrote about the hardships here, neglect, isolation, even abuse. These belongings aren't just forgotten toys. They're fragments of lives cut short." Elliot listened, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. The whispered voices he'd heard earlier, the faint echoes in the walls, were no longer just figments of imagination. They were remnants of pain etched into the building itself. As the crew gathered around Maya, she recounted tales from the school's troubled past. Children left to fend for themselves, punishments handed down in shadowed hallways, and tragedies that had never found closure. The rooms seemed to grow colder, the dusk light fading into creeping darkness. Jared, usually the skeptic, ran a hand over the cracked surface of a faded photograph showing a group of children with hollow eyes. "Maybe there's more to this place than just old bricks," he admitted, voice low. Tommy shivered, clutching Elliot's arm. "Do you think they're still here? The kids?" Elliot took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But whatever it is, it remembers. And now, so do we." The discovery of the hidden room marked a turning point. The tangible remnants of the past no longer allowed the crew to dismiss the strange noises or the whispers in the dark. The building was not just a structure awaiting renovation. It was a vessel of sorrow, its walls harboring memories that would not be silenced. As night fell over Holleridge, Elliot sat by the doorway, journal open. Outside, the wind stirred the dead leaves, and faint voices seemed to ripple through the air, soft, insistent, waiting to be heard. And somewhere, deep within the school's bones, the teeth in the walls shifted ever so slightly, as if sensing the intrusion. The night shift had settled over the Holleridge boarding school like a suffocating blanket, thick with silence, yet heavy with whispered secrets. Elliot Graves stood near the entrance to the gutted cafeteria, the floor beneath his boots creaking with each tentative step. The crew had long since retired to their makeshift quarters, but the rare few who remained were restless, their nerves taut like stretched wires. Elliot adjusted his worn leather jacket against the cold draft slipping through shattered window panes. His breath fogged in the stale air as he flicked open his journal, the pages yellowed and filled with careful, meticulous notes. The words he had written earlier in the day now felt fragile, as though exposing them to the night air might cause them to vanish. From somewhere deep within the building, a faint murmur drifted, the softest of whispers, too low to discern words but insistent enough to prick his skin. It was a voice that seemed to thread through the walls themselves, weaving between the rotted beams and peeling wallpaper. Elliot's fingers tightened around the pen, hesitating. Down the corridor, the skeletal framework of the old gymnasium groaned softly, a sound like a giant exhaling after a long slumber. The old school was awakening, not with life, but with memory, fragile, fragmented, and aching. Jared Morales leaned against the doorframe of the storage closet, arms crossed, muscles taut beneath his worn flannel shirt. His tattoos peeked from beneath rolled sleeves, symbols of battles fought and won, both outside and within. He scoffed quietly as the whispers seemed to grow louder, dismissing them as tricks born of exhaustion and the mind's penchant for fear. "It's just the wind playing games with us," Jared muttered, voice low but edged with a hint of uncertainty. "These old buildings always make noises." Elliot shot him a glance, noting the slight tremor in his jaw. Even the most pragmatic were not immune. Jared shifted, his gaze flicking toward the darkened hallway where shadows danced like restless spirits. Meanwhile, Tommy Briggs, the youngest on the crew and still green to the harsh realities of demolition, clutched his flashlight with white-knuckled fingers. His wide eyes darted nervously as the whispers seemed to press closer, invasive yet intangible. The cold sweat on his brow betrayed his fear, though he tried to mask it with forced bravado. "Did you hear that?" Tommy whispered, voice barely audible. Elliot nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into something chillingly clear. A faint, fragile voice, unmistakably a child's, called his name. Elliot. The sound was so soft, it could have been the wind, the creak of the wood, or a figment of imagination. Yet it struck him to the core, slicing through skepticism like a knife. His heart hammered in his chest as he scanned the shadows, searching for the source. There was nothing but the cold emptiness of the abandoned halls. Elliot's breath hitched. The voice was not just a whisper. It was a summons, a plea from the depths of the building's haunted memory. He stumbled back to the scaffold where his journal lay open, the words on the page suddenly seeming inadequate to capture the terror and sorrow that filled the air. His mind raced, torn between the desire to dismiss what he'd heard and the gnawing realization that something beyond understanding was reaching out to him. Jared's skepticism faltered as the temperature dropped sharply, his breath misting in front of him. The shadows seemed to pulse, and the faint outlines of childlike figures flickered in the corners of his vision, just beyond clarity. He swallowed hard, his tough exterior cracking. Maybe there's more to this place, he admitted reluctantly. The night deepened, and the whispers grew bolder, now voices overlapping, calling names long forgotten, recounting fragments of laughter and pain. Tommy's grip on his flashlight tightened as he stepped closer to Elliot, seeking comfort in the presence of his mentor. "What do we do?" Tommy asked, eyes wide and vulnerable. Elliot hesitated, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "We listen," he said finally, "and we prepare." As the night wore on, the crew found themselves caught in a web of fear and fascination. The whispered voices were no longer distant echoes, but active players in the unfolding nightmare. Each call, each murmur, chipped away at their resolve, forcing them to confront not just the haunted building, but the shadows lurking within their own pasts. Elliot closed his journal with a snap, the decision clear in his mind. Whatever these voices were, whatever presence haunted the walls, denial was no longer an option. The darkness was speaking, and he had no choice but to answer. The afternoon sun slanted through the broken windows of the old dormitory wing, casting long jagged shadows across the dust-choked floors. Maya Chen knelt beside a collapsed bookcase, fingers brushing away decades of grime to reveal a leather-bound diary, its cover cracked and worn. She inhaled sharply, the faint scent of old paper and mildew filling her senses as she carefully pried it open. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting, faded to a ghostly brown, but unmistakably legible. As Maya read, her face grew paler, the weight of each word settling upon her like a shroud. The diary belonged to a girl named Lillian, a student who had lived and suffered within the walls of Holleridge decades ago. "Elliot," Maya called softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to maintain. "You've got to see this." Elliot Graves approached, the worn leather jacket barely shielding his lean frame from the chill that seemed to seep from the building's bones. He crouched beside her, eyes narrowing over the fragile pages. The entries spoke of cold nights, punishment for minor misbehaviors, whispered rumors of disappearances, and an atmosphere thick with fear and neglect. This is worse than I thought," Elliot murmured. "They weren't just forgotten. They were trapped here in every sense." Maya nodded, her glasses catching the dim light. "And the worst part, Lillian's last entry ends abruptly mid-sentence. It's like she was taken before she could finish." Word of the diary spread quickly among the crew. That evening, in the makeshift break room, Elliot gathered everyone. The air was heavy thick with dust, fear, and something else, something unspoken. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he shared the diary's contents. "These kids, they suffered here," Elliot said, his voice low but firm. "And it seems their memories haven't faded. They're still in the walls, in the floors, in the very air we breathe." Whispers floated through the room, a low murmur of disbelief and unease. Claire Dunham crossed her arms, skepticism etched across her face. "Ghost stories won't finish this project," she said sharply, though even her voice trembled slightly. Jared Morales sat apart, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on his hands. The diary's revelations stirred something deep within him, memories he'd fought hard to bury. The sounds of Holleridge whispers, footsteps, distant laughter started to echo louder in his mind. Tommy Briggs, the young apprentice, approached Jared hesitantly. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Jared looked up, eyes dark with pain. "Yeah, just memories," he said, voice rough. "Some things never really leave you." The night deepened, and the boundary between past and present grew thinner. Elliot found himself wandering the silent halls alone, the diary's words swirling in his mind. The whispers returned, not just faint echoes this time, but distinct voices calling names, recounting fragments of forgotten conversations. He paused in a narrow corridor where peeling wallpaper revealed glimpses of faded photographs beneath the faces of children long gone. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Elliot's own childhood traumas pressed against his mind like a tide, merging with the building's sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty hallway, his breath visible in the chill. "I won't forget you." The walls seemed to listen. Somewhere, a distant scrape echoed, like nails on plaster. The presence within Holleridge was stirring, feeding on the pain and memories it had collected. Elliot knew the crew's journey was only beginning. The ghosts of the past were far from finished. As dawn broke, the first rays of light revealed fresh scratches on the walls, faint teeth like impressions that hadn't been there the night before. The haunting was becoming tangible, and the crew's fragile sanity would soon be tested beyond anything they had imagined. The diary was only the beginning. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and the thin line between memory and nightmare was starting to blur irrevocably. Elliot closed his eyes, bracing himself. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, and with them, new dangers. And somewhere in the depths of Holleridge, the children waited, their voices rising in an endless chorus of sorrow and warning. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick veil of dust and grime coating the windows of the old boarding school. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of sawdust, rust, and something less tangibly an undercurrent of unease that settled like a shadow over the construction crew. Elliot Graves stood on the cracked concrete floor of what was once the school's grand foyer. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the creaking ceiling and peeling wallpaper. His breath was steady, but inside, the knot of worry tightened. This was no ordinary renovation. The building seemed alive with secrets, and lately, those secrets were beginning to claw their way to the surface. The crew moved with cautious efficiency, the rhythmic pounding of hammers and the scrape of machinery creating a brittle soundtrack to the day. Jared Morales, the lead worker, was directing a team dismantling a wall near the east wing when a sudden, unexpected clatter froze everyone in place. A heavy steel beam, loosened by their efforts, toppled towards Jared, missing him by mere inches and crashing to the floor with a deafening crash. The crew gasped. Jared's face paled, his muscles taut as he stared at the beam like it was a specter. "What the hell?" he muttered, voice tight with something between anger and fear. Elliot rushed over. "Are you okay?" Jared nodded stiffly but didn't meet his eyes. The incident rippled through the team like a tremor, setting nerves on edge. Whispers spread. Was it carelessness, a faulty support, or something else? The building seemed to breathe around them, creaking and groaning as if displeased with their intrusion. As the day wore on, the accidents continued in smaller but unsettling ways. Tools vanished only to reappear in odd places. Lights flickered without cause. A sudden chill would sweep through rooms otherwise sealed from the outside air. The workers' chatter grew quieter, eyes darting to shadows that moved just beyond sight. In the cramped break room, tensions snapped. Jared, already frayed by his past battles with PTSD, found himself cornered by a younger worker questioning his decisions. Voices rose, accusations flew, and suddenly Jared's restraint shattered. He slammed his fist onto the table, eyes wild and unblinking. "You don't get it," he shouted, voice raw. "This place, it's messing with my head. I hear them, I see things, and you're acting like it's all in my imagination." The room fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging heavy. Elliot stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Jared, we're all feeling the pressure, but we need to stick together." Jared's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had erupted. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "It's just hard." Meanwhile, Tommy Briggs sat quietly near a cracked window, his gaze distant. "Elliot," he whispered during a rare lull in activity, "I keep hearing the kids laughing. Not here, but around us, like they're watching." Elliot knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay to be scared, Tommy, but you're not alone." Across the hall, Claire Dunham stood with arms crossed, the architect's usual composure faltering. She listened, half in disbelief, to the faintest murmurings echoing through the darkened corridor. The chill that crept along her spine was undeniable, and though she refused to admit it aloud, the evidence was stacking against her skepticism. The fractures within the crew were becoming as visible as the cracks in the plaster. Distrust and fear gnawed at the edges of their camaraderie, threatening to unravel the fragile unity that held them together in this haunted place. Elliot knew the path forward was perilous. They had to confront not only the building's ghosts, but their own. Only then might they salvage the project hand themselves from the shadows creeping ever closer. And somewhere deep within the walls, the teeth waited, patient and hungry.